Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webcast. My name is Christine Dorsey Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio chapter of APA and Chair of APA's New Urbanism Division, and I'm your webcast moderator. Today, oh wow, it's Friday the 13th, and we will be hearing the presentation, Integrating Green Infrastructure into Pittsburgh's Urban Fabric. For technical help during today's webcast, type your questions in the chat box found in the webcast toolbar to the right of your screen, or you can call that 1-800 number. For your content questions related to the presentation, again, type those in the chat box located in the webinar toolbar to the right of your screen, and we'll answer those at the end of the presentation during the Q&A. On your screen is a list of the sponsoring chapters and divisions for 2018. Thanks to all those participating sponsors for making these webcasts possible and free to their members. As always, if you're looking down the list and you don't see your chapter or division listed, we just ask that you reach out to them and suggest that they join us. Today's webcast is sponsored by the Pennsylvania chapter of APA, and you can learn more about them by heading over to planningpa.org. Up on your screen is a list of the rest of our webcasts for July, and you can register for these by visiting our webcast webpage, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. And to log your CM credits for attending today's webcast, head over to planning.org, log into your My APA account, and then under the CM log, you can search for CM activities, either by today's title or event number, both of which can be found again on our webcast webpage, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. This webcast has been approved for 1.5 CM credits for live viewing only. We do have some recorded webcasts that are available for distance education credits. Head over to our webcast webpage to learn more, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. Like us on Facebook, Planning Webcast Series, to receive up-to-date information on our sessions. And we are recording today's webcast. It will be available on our YouTube channel at the conclusion of the session. Just head over to YouTube and search Planning Webcast. We'll also have a PDF available at the end of the session, again, on our webcast webpage, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. Okay, with that, I am going to turn it over to today's speakers to get us started. Okay, Christine, you should receive a pop-up message. So go ahead and click yes, and you're good to go. Make sure that you put it into slideshow mode. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, great. Can everybody, Christine, you can see our full slide?
Yeah, looks great.
Okay, great. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us. My name is Christine Mondor, and I'm with Evolve Environment Architecture here in Pittsburgh, and I'm here with...
My name is Megan Ziegler, and I'm with the Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority.
So today we're going to walk you through an introduction to Pittsburgh's Green First plan. I'm going to walk you through a little bit behind the planning process. The planning process is ongoing, but we had a big push towards understanding how to implement our green infrastructure projects strategically, shed-wide. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. And then Megan's going to tell you more about how that's been implemented. And she's going to share some really good information on specific projects, and ones that were only thought about during the planning phase are now coming online. And so it's a really exciting time for us. So I know we're talking to a group of planners, and as planners, we're all aware of some of these issues. And probably many of you are from legacy cities like Pittsburgh, where we have combined sewer. And we know that in Pittsburgh, it's a little over a century ago that our infrastructure was created, and it's time for a renewal of that infrastructure. I want to point out that these pictures were taken as part of an effort to document how heroic this infrastructure was for the city when it was being put in, and to remind everybody that planners and infrastructure was once appreciated greatly. So we're hoping that that comes back again as into the public's perspective. We know that this is what was the the appearance of our streams and waterways previously, prior to having infrastructure. Getting the waterway as quickly as possible was really important. And so they set about to build very labor intensive and very massive infrastructure. And of course, Pittsburgh was a very different city then, with lots of industrial users and a pattern and population that's very different from what we have today. So we created a single system. At the time, this single system delivered all the water directly to the rivers. Later, we built interceptor pipes, and those interceptor pipes run along our rivers and took that water into a sewer treatment plant. So we're actually have two generations of infrastructure that we're working with. One is an original conveyance system, and then a 1960s interceptor system that, of course, takes everything and delivers it to conventional sewage treatment as we know it today. So we know, all of you know this, public isn't always really aware of how a combined sewer system works and the difference between dry flow and wet flow. Some places in the system, there isn't that much of a difference, and there still is overflow even at the slightest event. And we get images like this. In some cases, there is no door where we have raw sewage flowing into our rivers. So for those of you that haven't been to Pittsburgh, we have 3 rivers. Technically, there are 2. They become a 3rd one. You know, these are our pride and joy now. They once were our highway for industry, and now they're a place that people want to spend time. So addressing this is an issue. So the Green First plan was really to create the next century green infrastructure, specifically stormwater infrastructure. 1 city, 3 rivers, clean and green, 365 days is the way that PWSA talks about it. So the clean and green infrastructure assessment is a way of understanding how these smaller projects lead to bigger projects, because we know that we can't solve all of the problems that we have with regards to overflows with a number of small projects. We need to think at a kind of meso scale, macro scale, and micro scale. So we began to look at areas where green infrastructure could be the most effective. And having worked in other cities where the topography is not quite the same, if you haven't been to Pittsburgh, this is what many of our neighborhoods look like. We're separated by valleys. We have a very hilly topography, and so that's going to affect what you see in our solutions. We also looked deeply at the system capacity to understand what role green infrastructure played relative to a sewage treatment expansion plan and just general upkeep and maintenance, cleaning out pipes and understanding the existing storage and conveyance that we have in the system now. So green infrastructure is not the only tool we have to solve our overflow problems, but this study did validate that it's very important and can help save money for some of those larger investments, it's such as a plant expansion or replacement of pipes. So we have a number of issues that are related. Megan's going to actually talk about green infrastructure in kind of a conventional sense, but also some of the things that maybe we don't think of as green infrastructure. We have a lot of stream inflow. We have a lot of natural waterways that end up, unfortunately, in our sewer system as well. And so she's going to address some of that. And we wanted to understand where, you know, this stuff sits in each community. You know, PWSA, Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority, delivers both water and sewage for the city. And as such, most of the work that they've done has been underground. And knowing that this is above grade puts this firmly in a planning project scenario. They've been infrastructure managers, not necessarily dealing with the communities that are above ground. And luckily, folks like Megan and her background as a designer have really helped the Sewer Authority recognize this. So as part of this overall, an engineering design and engineering teams came together to look at the priority sheds, the top sheds. These are the top 30 sheds that contribute water to combined sewer overflow to our rivers. And thus prioritize them. Then looking at where we have these other factors, and this is really important. Where is there lower or higher risk? Risk for flooding, risk for basement overflow, things like that. Where is there opportunity? Where do we have projects that are ongoing that we can, street replacement, things that we can begin to pile on benefit with that? Where is there development and high activity? In neighborhoods where there is a lot of activity, we might lose the chance to either get key properties or to implement green infrastructure in development projects if we don't act on that quickly. And then synergies, where are there obvious multiple benefits? In some cases that might be related to economic justice, or it might be related to placemaking, and how do we prioritize projects, because so many places have need and so many communities are actually very interested in green infrastructure. Out of the 30, we chose 6 sheds, and I'll just point out here for those, the A22 is on the Ohio River, and so all the outflows are numbered from 0 on up. M is the Monongahela River, and those outflows, M19, M16, M29, reflect that, and A is the Allegheny River, and so those are thus named A41, A42. So we'll probably refer to those pretty quickly because that's shorthand, and I apologize. We'll try to reference it back to the river. So the methodology began while it is a citywide strategy, and that map that I just showed is really important to understand the magnitude and how we prioritize across the city system. It also is possible to be deployed across the region. There are communities outside the city of Pittsburgh boundary who contribute to our ALCO-SAN sanitary sewage treatment plant. And so PWSA and ALCO-SAN have been working together to understand how the Sewershed methodology can be used across outside of the city of Pittsburgh. So the method works at 3 different scales. It works at a citywide scale where we're looking at the sheds, the prioritization of the sheds, creating a citywide hydrological model, and developing strategies and incentives that can be deployed across the city. How do you create communities of action in the city around green infrastructure? At the Sewershed scale, and I'll show you an example of this, we're developing community-informed Sewershed master plans. Most people in Pittsburgh think of themselves in their unit of identity as the neighborhood. That's not uncommon. However, what's interesting is that you'll see that Sewersheds often span neighborhoods because neighborhoods divide themselves up by the valleys. So there's a neighborhood on one side of the valley, one on the other. However, they have a shared asset in these valleys. And so our challenge is to get people to understand themselves as part of a sewershed, not just part of their neighborhood. And lastly, at the project scale, we need to look both at the effectiveness of the independent project, but also how that project is part of a connected network. We cannot store much on site. Slope, soil type, and our density and urbanization doesn't allow us to capture a lot. As a matter of fact, this year with the amount of rain we've had a lot of issues of landslides, so there can actually be a disincentive to put the water back in the ground on site. And so we look at networked systems as one of our priorities. And how those systems are embedded in our communities and welcomed in our communities is the part that the plan is really looking hard at. And as we get our first projects online, we're beginning to understand what those challenges are and what those opportunities are. So this is an example of the types of valleys, and you can see the stormwater infrastructure of olden days has just gone in here. You know, water's always determined the identities of our neighborhoods, and we really need people to re-identify with that water and to understand themselves as part of a shed. So to that end, I'm going to walk you through a kind of typical, easy to understand shed analysis. Many of the sheds are more complex than this one, but this one is a moderate size and is an easy one to understand. So if you look at the development patterns in this shed, this has 4 different neighborhoods of 4.5 different neighborhoods that it touches. And it's a fairly well built out neighborhood. There's not a lot of vacant lots, and there's not a lot of development occurring. As a result, it's a fairly stable shed. Looking at the water lines, there is some significant water infrastructure, and a great historic story for another presentation as to the integration of our drinking water delivery system into the design of our city parks. And we're happy to have those assets. But what's interesting in this leaf-like structure is that this is the water delivery system, and this is the sewer delivery system. So this is what happens when you have a pump and power, and this is what happens when gravity takes effect. So basically, this is tracing the historic route of the stream. And again, that's not uncommon, especially in cities that have topography to deal with. The master model says that there are that gives us the quantities that we need to capture and hold. It also can tell us where some of the best places might be, but this is possibilistic. It's not necessary to capture only these areas, but it helped us understand where there might be better potential. So the kit of parts that we have in all of these sheds that's common across all of them is that there is generally valley storage, and that valley storage is really important for us because especially in sheds like this, you just can't store very much upstream. So this is our chance in this case to take a parking lot that services our zoo and to restore that area into a more naturalized and functional, hydrologically functional waterscape. But we can't just dump the water from the adjacent neighborhoods. So we have infrastructure such as what we've called a stop and drop. In this case here, just the way the city develops, these are large areas that have gotten infilled over a period of time and have serve as public parks. They're both baseball fields, ironically, but historically they were valleys that minor valleys that were filled in then later to serve as recreation places. So capturing water with deep tank storage and significant investment in infrastructure there allows us to create a network of conveyance. But we need to expand the capture area because we don't get enough water into that valley system or the stop and drops until we begin to really reach out into the community. So there's a need to create the big infrastructure components, the kind of secondary infrastructure components, and then the more easily understood streetscapes and site interventions further up to create a networked system. So we know that this is maybe what we need to do. How do we work with the community to understand how to improve the places within the community, and how do we understand where there's investment being made so we can stack our infrastructure on top of existing investment. So it ends up in something like this in terms of a series of strategies trying to align with city initiatives like our Complete Streets initiative, economic opportunities, bioswales, looking at potentially private property incentives, understanding where private property water is going to, but also perhaps public right-of-way water coming onto private property as a kind of financial incentive system. We need to understand our maintenance protocols, both for public right-of-ways and within the private sector, and help people get used to new types of systems. Understanding how we're working with existing infrastructure and these large-scale systems like subsurface storage. And lastly, how we deal with long-term ecological restoration. And I think the thing that is really powerful about all these things is that PWSA, of course, can't do this by themselves. And so really it's about building a network of people who can help implement these things. So what happened as we were going through this project and working with PWSA is that we recognized we were doing these really big urban sheds, a citywide plan, And there were lots and lots of popcorn, we call it projects on the ground, and they were being done by all sorts of people. Maybe an agency, city agency, was thinking about something. Watershed nonprofits are hugely effective here in the region to get projects started, and they had a whole list of things they wanted to do, community, neighborhoods, but there is no kind of just a direct flow of these projects and no way of managing all of them. So out of doing this citywide plan came into effect the need for an implementation plan, a kind of middle level, and a shed manager that helps to coordinate all of these players and partners, align their efforts, and then make sure that PWSA is able to legally capture the benefit for the purposes of meeting the consent decree and consent orders, and put this back into the system. So it represents a kind of rethinking of the structure of the agency itself. And so I'll just close my part by telling you a little bit about how it gets integrated into other planning processes, and the first steps of putting that shift in the structure of the agency into helping sister agencies also understand and their role in this too. For this one, we're going to look on the Monongahela River, M19, in a historic area called Soho Run, which of course the run doesn't exist anymore. But this had a similar type strategy of understanding the network of moving through how water moves through the community. You'll see here, due to large-scale massive urban redevelopment, there's actually two separate parts to this shed. And so, again, these people that are farther up on the hill and the top of the screen probably don't even recognize their water hits the river. Looking for distributed detention sites and understanding the network that conveys to these detention sites, and then looking at how this finds its way into the infrastructure that people see, whether it's green conveyance corridors, and looking at intersection improvements that are coming through a bus rapid transit project and other city investment in streets. Looking at what the stormwater technology is and where that might fall under somebody else's strategies, and where PWSA might have to take the lead on some of these. Looking at where private development might be able to not only create kind of public amenities and connection points, but also convey water strategically through the neighborhood, as well as become net zero sites themselves. And looking at innovative financing models like the pay for success model to say, can you package some of these things and put it out there as a kind of turnkey product? And then looking where there might be large scale public investment in, say, a portal park or something here that is now just a fallow site, but could actually become useful in the water story and become a public amenity. And so looking at all of these things have to ultimately connect to the river. The portal park also needs to get people across 16 lanes of highway. The water needs to get there. People need to get there. How can these types of things take a moonscape under the bridge that looks like this and maybe begin to have some sort of artistic or park-like consideration of how people move through, and finally find their way down to the river. And matter of fact, it's very difficult for pedestrians and water to make it to the river here, so let's solve both those problems at one time. And so all of this is being done as PWSA is thinking about what they need to do to move water and thinking about the co-benefits and what else needs to be solved in that neighborhood. But in the same way, the neighborhood is thinking about what it needs through the process in Uptown of a eco-innovation planning process. And so the entire district was being planned kind of simultaneous to this and came to many of the same conclusions of what they wanted: connectivity, connection to rails and trails, connection to the river. And so they were able to work with the PWSA team in order to integrate this work into a zoning document that requires certain things to be completed and incentivized in some cases for planning projects within that district. And likewise, further upstream, looking at where other implementation plans were being created, making sure that key properties are being preserved and that this is being understood as a placemaking opportunity within that. Getting to those implementation partners is a hugely, hugely important effort. And Megan's going to talk about a project in M19 that actually got implemented already and is one of the ones that PWSA was able to have more control over, so it finds its way into the queue faster.
All right, so following up on the M19, one of the things that was really interesting about that sewer shed as a whole, and Christine kind of alluded to it, with the development, it did kind of create a natural dam that did start to actually split that sewer shed into two. So what we were looking at with the EID in that particular portion of Uptown, this is on the other side, more in the Hill District. If you've heard of any of these, on the backside of the University of Pittsburgh's campus. So Center and Heron was a project that is a city parcel. It is so acquisition, or PWSA currently does not own any property. So a lot of times we are working with both city real estate or our urban redevelopment authority to identify key project areas and parcels. And this is actually something that's solidified over the last 2 years, where if anyone is trying to actually purchase a property, they actually will send it to us and kind of we get to sign off on it now, which is something that is very unusual in some cases, but it's us making strides very quickly to really be moving these projects forward. So this project is an M19, like I said, it is taking about almost 2 acres of impervious area and redirecting it into about a 585-foot long bioswale. So it is redirecting street flow. There is a lot of impervious runoff coming from the hillside, coming from Pitt's campus, and also coming from just up streets. But we finished it and had a ribbon cutting a few weeks ago. And so it's a really good example of integrated design. It's very aesthetic. We did kind of incorporate different components to make sure that it really is kind of a gateway into the neighborhood. We incorporated core tin steel in the process as well, just kind of harkening back to Pittsburgh's kind of the steel industry. We have a lot of projects. Our program has been moving forward pretty significantly over the past 4 years. I've been with the authority 3.5 years. So as we're scaling up with both resources internally and externally, we're able to kind of push more projects out. So this is one, A27. So as part of our Green First plan, we did kind of pick 6 particular sewer sheds that we were kind of prioritizing for doing the conceptual master plans, which is what Christine walked you through. So this is one that was unusual because it doesn't have a lot of development pressure at this time. It's on the north side of the city. It starts within a park and then kind of works its way back down to the river. So this is one that we are doing a lot of stream restoration and park improvements, reforestation as part of this one, which is slightly unusual. And one of the things that we're realizing with this particular project is because we are getting some of these flash flood storms that are becoming more and more consistent as far as climate change and resiliency and things of that nature, having to rethink how our approach is, because the pervious area is acting just as much as it would as if it was impervious during flash storm events. So this is one that we are kind of doing underground storage or widening our streams to make them a little bit more able to handle those flows. Looking at how do we work with our parks department and making trail improvements and really trying to keep sediment from getting in our natural stream so that it can actually function more like a stream. One of the other ones that we're doing on our large scale sewer shed scale level is A22. This is both our largest as far as area and our largest as far as CSO. How are we kind of looking at our upland reaches of the neighborhoods? This particular sewer shed does have high vacancy on the upper reaches, both with the Larmer community and Homewood communities that kind of flow down to a very channelized area that is technically within a park. And then it is kind of situated near a lock and dam situation with the Army Corps. this particular project, we have conceptual designs. We are working with the Army Corps of Engineers because of the impacts that the outfall does have on the dam system. They are working with us for the design on this project. We did have fatalities here, and so this is definitely one that is a high priority and really kind of a large emphasis for us as an authority. This is looking at how do we kind of depave further upstream. How do we kind of make sure that we're managing our sediments that are coming off our steep hillsides. There's an old veterans hospital that the city is in the process of purchasing from the federal government. So how do we actually start to incorporate stricter components into the RFP process so that we're making sure that we are kind of holding these developments in these priority areas to a higher standard. And again, we are really looking to how do we actually connect back to the river and how do we reestablish that. This is in alignment with the neighborhood of Larmer was a choice neighborhood recipient, which is a HUD EPA collaboration. And there's a lot of new affordable housing being constructed. And so all of that, because of code, is built being separated. It's a great opportunity to kind of create a more naturalized system of storm separation. So moving forward with those things as well, is a new park being incorporated as part of this project. So how do we kind of tie all of these efforts cohesively together between city agencies and for the neighborhoods? 4 Mile Run, or M29, this is our third largest CSO contributor. Again, this does focus around a park. It is looking at how this particular sewer shed does have a lot of institutions. This is where the University of Pittsburgh is. This is a part of their campus, the CMU campus as well. So how are we really trying to utilize those institutionals or those large property owners to really be able to direct their water through a system and again, reestablish it at the bottom with an old brownfield site that is made a very strong commitment. It's Hazelwood Green, formerly known as the Almano site, but they are making a very strong commitment to sustainability and design. So how do we actually kind of work and blend those efforts together? This is an issue where we have a lot of sewers that are surcharging, and you can see a nice geyser there that's down in the Junction Hollow area of the city. It floods continuously. Anytime we get a heavy rainstorm, as we have been lately, I'm getting calls from residents saying the street's flooded, there's sewer in their basement. So really us taking a more proactive approach to stormwater, we really see that as one investment that's going to alleviate multiple issues such as this. This again would be how do we kind of incorporate complete streets and use our topography as conveyance systems, restoring our streams and giving them a little bit more capacity. There's a historic lake that is there, and how do we kind of make retrofits to that and make it more effective? Currently with this project, we did do a modification to the outlet structure where we have a valve that allows the water during storm events to kind of raise up and hold water that will slowly drain down, which is a new technology that we're testing out currently on the lake. But then again, how do we use basins and constructed wetlands to not only store that storm water, but also clean it so that it's cleaner when it's actually getting into our rivers. Again, this is also working in tandem with our Department of Mobility and Infrastructure. They are looking at how do you create more transit opportunities via autonomous vehicles, connecting with both the Hazelwood Green site and actually through the neighborhoods to connect them back up to the Oakland area, which is where a huge employment center for the city. So those are kind of working in tandem between these efforts as well. M29, this is another park project that we're doing. There was a master plan that was done, a conceptual master plan that was completed a few years ago. And when the authority learned about it, it was in an area where we were having a lot of localized flooding and basement backups. And so this project is being done in partnership with the Department of Public Works. And this will allow, we're retrofitting a kind of a smaller scale community park, but this would have a constructed wetlands, underground storage that we're doing under a baseball field. And again, this is just showing when we're leveraging our dollars effectively, we're able to kind of work collaboratively and have more of an impact for neighbors, which is really what we're trying to accomplish. One of the areas that was the antithesis for our Green First plan was the A22 Sewer Shed. It's a very interesting sewer shed that kind of starts at a university and runs through multiple different neighborhoods. One of the things that's unique about Pittsburgh is people are just kind of used to it, and they don't call and complain when there's sewage in their basement. And there was one event in 2014 where we got 11 calls, and that was a little unusual. And so we actually sent out a survey, and we got those results back, and it was 136 chronic basement flooding issues that we weren't even aware of. So it kind of changed how we were looking at what we were doing across the city, and knowing that you can't just keep putting pipes because it's just sending the problem just down a street or down a block. So that was kind of the first one. So this is one that we have been doing considerable projects kind of in the first phase. These are under construction now. Hillcrest is one. This was constructed last fall and then finished up in the spring. So the picture on the right was actually on July 4th. So between July 2nd and July 4th, we got 5.94 inches of rain in this area, and we have a rain gauge down the street that was recording that data. And so far in the city, we've gotten about 34.5 inches of rain this year. And so if we're anticipating at least another 20 inches of rain this year, which means that we're going to be in our historic rainfall numbers for the year. But this, the picture on the right was from the 4th. The picture on the left was actually one that I took on Wednesday, and so it has drained down, but this is showing like how effective this is, and this is at the top of the watershed, so keeping that water out so it's not creating issues downstream. This is in another part of the area where we are doing right-of-way improvements. So how do we kind of work with, we have a lot of stairs, so how do we kind of make improvements for pedestrian crossings and improvements? This is under construction now. This is the shady side area where we are looking at. This is where we're getting a lot of basement backups and complaints. So this is going to be a lot of underground storage, but starting to do our green alleys program and doing stormwater tree pits and things like that and bump outs to kind of have more of an impact in a very urban area within the city. We're starting to kind of work a little bit more with developers and property owners, because we acknowledge that doing things in city property or city right-of-way, we're never going to get to where we need to be to meet our compliance goals. So this is one that we will be working with Chatham University. It's at the top of a watershed, but how do we help this has streams, which are very prominent in the city, streams and springs. We have old mines and acid mine drainage that come into the system at different points. But again, it's like, how can we work together? This is their campus, so they would be kind of going and paying for some of those above and beyond landscape amenities, but we would be handling more of the stormwater components as part of this project. This is one other one that we're doing. It's a park. As part of the city planning department, they did an assessment of all of our open space a few years ago, and this particular parklet was slated for naturalization, meaning that its proximity to another park didn't necessarily mean that this needed to serve the same purpose. And so as we've been looking at it, because of the slope, as you can kind of see, it kind of directs down to a low point, kind of made it a very natural area to remove playground equipment and to actually make it more of a passive stormwater park. So we're in the process of that design right now. That'll be finished at the end of the year and will be constructed next year. But this again is in partnership with both our planning department and DPW, who will be removing the equipment, helping with maintenance moving forward. And so that's all we have for today. Definitely want to make sure we open it up to any questions that you may have. Here's our contact information, and we'll keep that on the screen as we transition into questions.
Okay, thank you. Believe it or not, it doesn't look like we have any questions yet. So we're just waiting for those to come in again. In the questions box, it's located in your webinar toolbar to the right of your screen. And please don't raise your hand. It looks like people are trying to do that. You need to type the questions in. And while people are doing that, I will remind everyone that this presentation will be available on our YouTube channel. Just search Planning Webcast on YouTube. And we'll also have a copy of it available as a PDF on our webcast webpage, which is ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. Okay, we're starting to get the questions in now. Holy smokes, here we go. So first question, can you talk about funding sources a little bit more?
This comes down to funding. So yes, so currently the majority of the funding has come from PwC's capital budget. The planning efforts was an operational expense, but so far that has been the driver. We are trying to do about $15 to $20 million a year in stormwater projects. We did work with Algasan, who is the wastewater treatment provider for the county, and they have 83 municipalities. They have a grant program that we've received probably about $7 million thus far with the projects that we have submitted. That's based upon how effective you are in managing and taking water out of the system. We do have partnerships on certain projects where it is park projects. DCNR is a funding partner for Whiteman Park, which is a state agency. The Army Corps has been a partner, and even there has been some foundation support for 4 Mile Run and for another project we're doing on the south side. And planning, actually right now, if the way that it works with planning, if you are unable to meet your stormwater requirement, there is a in lieu of fund. And so Lawn and Affiliate Parklet is actually one of our first that we are drawing from our stormwater trust fund. So that's been it so far. We are in the process of evaluating and implementing a stormwater utility fee that will go live in 2020. And so as soon as that would be our primary funding source, and that is based upon impervious area. And so residents would have a consistent bill per parcel. Then it would be kind of, it would vary for our larger property owners as well. And that is a more equitable way, because currently it's based upon sewer and water usage, or water usage actually. Our sewer rate is based upon how many gallons of water you use. And that's about 70% of our customer base. And they're not the ones who are contributing to the stormwater issue. So it kind of shifts the onus more appropriately for the city.
Okay, thanks. You mentioned sewage backups. Is this sanitary like brown water? And if so, are there any other activities like eliminating cross connections or smoke testing for illegal connections to storm?
So 80% of the city is a combined sewer system. And so when we do say that there is surcharging in the system, oftentimes it is raw sewage that is coming into the system. And then the southern part of the city, those are later municipalities that were annexed, neighborhoods that were annexed to the city. And so those actually do have separation. They're separated systems. So those fall into our MS4 permit, but the others are mainly more of our consent decree with the EPA.
So there's a legend that Pittsburgh has, and I know other legacy cities have it too, with the Pittsburgh potty that's in your basement. And the legend in Pittsburgh goes that it's the steel workers were so dirty that they showered downstairs. But the historians have kind of debunked that and said that it was in fact to prevent sewer backup in your basement, and that was your kind of outlet for it, so you could push it back down a little bit later.
Huh, that's interesting. Are there any, I know at least in Ohio, the EPA is cracking down, and in the city that I live in, all the combined sewer overflows have to be replaced. Are there talks about doing that in Pittsburgh?
No, our attempt is to actually just keep the water out of the system through green infrastructure and manage it before it even enters the pipe. Current code, where it makes sense, current code, you do have to separate all new development. So we will strategically separate, but we're trying to not just based on the cost of what that would be. I mean, we have over 1,200 miles of pipe. So it would add up really quickly and take a really long time to actually implement that.
Okay. Next question. What influence have LEED projects had on Pittsburgh green infrastructure initiatives?
As part of, so Pittsburgh is unique because we do have P4, which is kind of a more LEED, but it is looking at development, performance, place, people, and planet are the 4 Ps. And that is kind of integrating into code. The Eco Innovation District in Uptown, that started to set a higher threshold for development as far as how they were managing it. And it was based more off some of the LEED or sites initiative as well. And that is also currently in our Riverfront Overlay District that is hopefully going to council next week. So from that standpoint, I think we are wanting to do kind of an overhaul of our stormwater code, which would kind of give a little bit more, I call it a carrot flavored stick, because part of when we do launch the fee, we do want to have kind of an incentive and rebate program. So that would create more of an incentive for developers to manage their stormwater more efficiently. And there is an ordinance for any development that is receiving 2 million, or is it 1 million?
I think it's 1 million.
1 million in public funds, which doesn't take a lot when you're doing these large scale projects. It has a higher threshold that they have to hit for green infrastructure.
Yeah, I think LEED, of course, any building that's following LEED helps, but it really helps in the source reduction from the sanitary side. We do a lot of LEED projects, and a lot of times these are infill sites, and there's not a lot of opportunity to do green infrastructure, maybe on a full site build out, but they're doing storage. And some of that's LEED, but a lot of it is just our city code is really forcing a higher level of performance. So.
Thank you. Interesting question. Has the county adopted a similar stormwater policy? And with that, how are you collaborating with other neighboring jurisdictions?
Right. So there is the Act 167, which is kind of a universal code that would be in effect for all of Allegheny County. That has to be adopted by all municipalities by December of this year. It did go to the DEP, and they have 6 months to implement it. And the way that works is anytime that whatever code is more stringent supersedes any of the other codes. So in the city of Pittsburgh, our code is currently stronger than the base ordinance, except for the one place that it changed was riparian zones and floodplain setbacks. That is something that will have to be incorporated because that did have a higher threshold than what is currently in city code. Alcosan is, because they are the regional sewer authority for the area, does have a consent decree with the EPA as well. And they are kind of currently taking what we were doing in citywide and trying to look at it from more of a regional effort, because water knows no boundaries. So even what's happening within the city scale, neighborhood to neighborhood, municipality to municipality, it doesn't matter. One thing that the authority has been taking the lead on for 4 years now is Sawmill Run, which is an interagency agreement with 12 different municipalities along. It's the only open air stream within the city. And we are working with them mainly from an MS4 TMDL joint application. But right now we are trying to figure out, we have projects that have been identified kind of across municipal boundaries. So we are trying to figure out how that works as far as, hey, we're going to do a project in this particular community, knowing that it will have impact on the city, and what will that cost share be? So that report is slated to be finished by the end of in December. So we'll start moving with implementation starting next year.
Thank you. What kind of support or response do you get from your constituents, like residents, for example? Are they engaged in the development process? And with that, well, first let's answer that, and then I'll go to the second part of that question.
Okay, we have a pretty robust nonprofit and advocacy community here who's had stormwater and green infrastructure on the radar screen for a number of years. And out of that community, prior to even PWSA taking this on, there have been advocacy groups for 30, 40 years trying to do this. 9 Mile Run Watershed Association, really laid the foundation of this idea in the late 90s, but other community groups have gotten involved because their lived experience of stormwater is very real. And Megan mentioned A22, where there was a loss of life due to flooding, and that kind of galvanized a community called Larmer to really think hard about their upstream impact. And out of that came a project called Living Waters of Larimer that looked at small scale site-based issues. And there's a little eco center, community center that has a great rain garden and some little things that people can do themselves, and some really amazing stories that the residents will tell you about how far they go to conserve water and to bring water onto their site. But it also, that group is the group that really pushed hard on this Choice Neighborhood project and this development that's coming in to say that, if you're building new, please don't just separate. Like, let's talk about how we bring that water back out to the landscape. And because of that, enabled this conversation to happen with the Army Corps of Engineers. And so PWSA has been really great in kind of picking up the ball, and running with it, because it's now at a scale where a small community group or an advocacy group or a nonprofit, they just can't take it any further. They don't have the jurisdiction. And I think PWSA has been really respectful and collaborative in working with those groups. That said, we're all learning as we go. And so we're all, there are moments where there are things we missed and wish we could go back and change it. And then, moments where we're going to have to figure out how green infrastructure really works best in our neighborhoods and in our regions, and hoping that the community's with us on that as a kind of learning journey, because, you just can't anticipate everything, such as these massive rainfalls we've been having lately.
Thank you. So private property owners, they are involved. Residents are involved. But for those that might need some more coaxing, are there any incentives for private property owners to reduce permeable surfaces on their property, or find ways to redirect some of the stormwater, things like that?
Yes. So one of the things we did do 2 rounds of grant cycles, and that was one, it was for some of those smaller nonprofits or community groups to do demonstration projects, and knowing that it's not necessary, that's not our high capture, we're not going to meet our consent decree with all those projects, but it was more of a neighborhood scale education opportunity. And then a portion of that was also a matching grant program that was able to, for people who were going above and beyond meeting just stormwater code, was a way to offset them a little bit as an incentive. And so we will be continuing that program as the fee. We did not do a round this year because we are ramping up for next year. But property owners right now, that had been our mechanism, but we will be doing more of a robust program moving forward.
Right now, it's been mostly incentivizing, because unless you're building new construction and coming into the code, there's not much of a stick. But
Right.
when the stormwater fee goes into place, it's going to change the economics of it. And PWSA has been attentive to not burdening property owners who can't pay, perhaps, especially kind of small scale and residential or lower income, but to assess, like Megan said, some of the properties that contribute a lot are able to carry some of that responsibility, and that'll happen when the stormwater fee comes into play.
And I would say that right now when we are doing projects in the neighborhoods, we are reaching out to the residents we've learned a lot of lessons over the past 2 years for sure as to what's most appropriate. And we are even just covering, making sure that we're even sending like certified mail just to be like, hey, like letting people know, and even going door to door and meeting with residents if there is a system going in front of their property. Because a lot of times, you know, people have been taking care of their right of way for 20, 30 years, and they assume that it's their land. And we're like, no, actually it's public, and we do have the right, but we have had to alter some designs because it was just at this stage and the infancy of the program, it wasn't worth the fight, and having a negative connotation associated with the project. But we do have, leading up, pretty much 2019 is the year of kind of outreach and education and really trying to like get the word out. We're developing a full campaign, just to make sure that people fully understand why and what they're going to see as far as the systems coming online, and with the fee, what it will cover and how it will benefit them. So it's going to be a lot of talking next year and educating people.
Thanks. In your plans, are you specifically addressing the issue of equity, particularly for the underserved neighborhoods, communities?
Yes, and I would say that because of the way that the fee is structured, that will actually help offset some of those rates, because it is more equitable because they're not contributing to that. So because it will be a separate kind of tariff, their sewer rates will go down. So that is good. And I mean, we were very conscious of doing projects. I mean, Hillcrest is within the Garfield neighborhood, and it may have gotten a little bit better, but it was like 19% vacancy at one point. And that was doing a project there first was a way to kind of say like, yes, we're not coming to you last. We're not just focusing on the higher neighborhoods. And I would say the Living Waters of Larmer, that was an underserved community in a lot of ways. And that was really, if you could meet Miss Mary, you would be just amazed at how serious and how just energizing this community was, and really embracing this concept and conserving their water, and really just starting to be our best advocates.
I think ironically, probably the majority of the grassroots advocacy for green infrastructure has come from historically underserved communities, whether it's Rosedale, Block Cluster, Larimer, and that some of our most wealthy communities like Shadyside only experience this issue as basement backups because it's a built out community. There's not a lot of green space. They don't see the opportunities for, you know, green infrastructure in the same way as communities that maybe are caring for the vacant lot next to their house do. So I think the awareness has actually come more from the underserved communities.
I would agree.
Okay. So like Cleveland, where I'm at, Pittsburgh sees winter. How do you maintain the green infrastructure, particularly, let's say, permeable pavers, during the winter months when you're dealing with a lot of salt and trucks and scraping? How do you ensure that your infrastructure stays intact?
To be determined. We haven't built any of those yet. We do have a permeable asphalt parking area that has been holding up well. The plows actually do have the appropriate kind of more the buffer, so it's not going to scrape the roads or the permeable pavers. Those systems, because they are permeable, they allow for more flow, so they're actually going to be better in the winter months from a freeze thaw cycle. And salts are just that's a huge issue, the way that we do have to salt the roads. And so a lot of times what we do is we sandbag and block the water in the winter from actually going into the system. But we are doing a lot of them with with plant material that can handle the salts.
There's a interesting kind of the topography of Pittsburgh doesn't allow for us to have a lot of flat paving. And so when you don't have flat paving, putting water underneath the paving sometimes can be really cost prohibitive because you have to build check dams and you really have to you know, it's not in our soils. It's not going back into the ground. It's just an underwater conveyance system. I think one of the interesting things about is our rainfall intensity, which happens to be much greater in the seasons that the plants are alive, whereas in the winter, our water entering the system's coming in more slowly because we're not either getting the cloud bursts that we get in the summer, or it's snow and the melt is just coming off at a different pace. So we're paying attention to the intensities and the frequency of our storm events, as well as the impact on, you know, sending salts into the plant areas and what areas are sacrificial and need to be replaced more frequently than others, and how are we planning that those sites to understand different frequency of maintenance.
Okay, next question. Is there a link to the master plan for these improvements somewhere?
Yes. I know it's on our website. I think it's on the Growing Green page. We do have both, I know phase 1 of the Green First plan is there, and it does kind of have all the conceptual master plans. And then I don't know if phase 2, we did kind of do the next round of sewer sheds, finished at the end of last year. So I don't know if that's been uploaded. We're in the process of updating our website, so I don't know if our content is as accurate as it could and should be, but it is on the website.
Okay. So how and when will you evaluate the effectiveness of this program?
We're doing that on a daily basis. And part of the reason is that Pittsburgh is really advocating for a green approach. We're making significant improvements along our riverfronts, and the alternative was more of a tunnel system. And so we really want to limit that and really kind of advocate for Alcosan to utilize the current tunnel system effectively before we do that. So we have kind of an interim kind of pause, if you will, with the consent decrees, which is 2023. So we do have a lot of kind of work and proof to give the regulators between now and then. We are doing pre and post construction for all of our projects. So we do have flow meters in where we're actually calibrating, so we can really kind of definitively say how much water we are taking out of the system throughout. So we are constantly kind of evaluating and making sure that we're doing the right thing, or changing where we're going to be focusing, or, you know, how we might need to tweak our designs. So that's an iterative process for sure.
And on the monetary side, are you trying to, or are you able to track kind of on one side the capital expenditures, you know, all the money you're putting into it, and then on the other side, are you able to start modeling what the future savings might look at to see sort of where you shake out in, I don't know, 20 years? Have you done any kind of, you know, kind of cost benefit yet?
Some, not a ton. And part of that is, so we're in the process of creating a new MOU with the city, because right now stormwater is kind of split in between multiple agencies, and that's not necessarily cost effective, or it creates kind of a confusion as to who's responsible for what. So that is something that we are currently doing right now. One of the things that are unknown is taking over some of the systems that are historically not been within our purview within our park systems, and some of the MS4 issues. Those are a little unknown, so the impacts to our budget are unclear at this point. We right now, since our program is still kind of new, we do have landscape contractors who are doing maintenance for the first year to 2 years, depending on the job. We are working with our nonprofit partners. So Center and Heron, as a Western Pennsylvania Conservancy, is doing the maintenance for that, where they will be doing continual fundraising for that to continue ongoing maintenance. We are participating in the National Green Infrastructure Certification Program. So I think Pittsburgh, if I'm not mistaken, we have the most people to kind of go through that program so far. And we are looking, historically, it kind of started out with our contractors and our inspectors kind of doing it, but we are working to kind of make that more, to incorporate more of our local kind of workforce development opportunities in that as well. Historically, kind of across the country, communities are telling us that they need to allocate 5 to 10% of the capital cost for ongoing maintenance. So that's kind of what we're trying to base that on. And then depending, like some of the park stuff, we do have our nonprofit partners or other city agencies who will be responsible for certain components of projects as well. Ask me again in like 3 years and I'll probably have a very different answer.
Right? Okay. Could you talk about maybe one or two, I guess, fails that ended up needing to be redesigned or changed in some way?
Yep, Center and Heron. Utility duct bank did not show up on the survey, and there was no manhole or no record of it until we were breaking ground. So our inlet system had to be, and our inlet system on how we were getting water into the system and how we were getting out of the system had to be completely redesigned while under construction, to the tune of about $35,000. So that was a little blow. Again, we had a higher cost on some of those first projects, knowing, as I did say, that we did relocate one of the systems further downhill. It didn't take away from the value of the project, but it was redirected more to a vacant property, so it was better. Melbourne, Finland, actually, there was a guy who had purchased a property through side lot and he didn't know, and he wanted a driveway, so I think they're retrofitting that design as well. So I think just it's every time we're like, this is how it should work. Every project has been different, and the issues that have come up. Right now we had like the week of the 4th, we got, about in one night we got 3 inches of rain within the span of about 2 hours in some parts of the city. So we are kind of battling that right now with educating the community. They're like, we never had this issue till you put in this rain garden. I'm like, well, you had 3 feet of water in your street. It's not necessarily the rain garden, but we are having to kind of go back and see how was that, obviously that system was overwhelmed, but was it part of the paving? Is it redirecting too much flow to one particular community member? Or how do we need to, with the intensity of the storms being so extreme, especially this year, do we need to be designing to a different threshold? That's one of the things I think that we're really kind of grappling with right now. And I'm punting it up even to like the other city agencies, the resiliency office, the budget office, and just, how as a city do we need to start being more proactive in buying properties and not allowing people to be in vulnerable areas, because it does put a huge burden from an emergency services standpoint and a homeowners from their insurance standpoint when there's just places that people shouldn't live.
And you add to that I think green infrastructure is just the tip of the iceberg in thinking about how we manage our natural systems in urban spaces, because Pittsburgh hasn't had a lot of high maintenance landscape architecture in its past compared to some cities, and we don't have the same, I think, well-developed professional maintenance system that other cities might have. And if we're going to be relying on volunteers or communities or a professional system, we need to all be committed as a city that it's going to take maintenance. These things, need labor, they need to be maintained. Cost aside, it's just a different relationship we need to have with our landscape. And I think where that comes in is even just looking at our naturalized, what we think of as our naturalized areas of hillsides and wooded areas are being overtaken by a lot of invasives. If those invasives, if the vines and such end up killing those trees that are providing valuable root systems and uptake, and we get more runoff, and now we've compounded a problem that a little green infrastructure thing on a vacant lot was never really meant to solve in the first place. You know, we need to think more strategically about landscape management, urban landscape management, and I think this is the beginning of that awakening for us.
Thank you. You both have been kind of talking here and there about maintenance, but I'm still getting a lot of questions about it. What generally are the maintenance requirements going to be for this?
20 years, or like how long?
Yeah, so we are doing it. So part of all of our projects now have an O&M kind of life cycle a maintenance guide that's being put together. I mean, a lot of it is, cutting back the plants, making sure that sediment isn't blocking the system. If sediment is getting into the underground storage, vacuuming that out, emptying all the inlet filter bags so that it's emptying out those sediments, or cleaning the catch basins, putting in rock from time to time, pruning trees, cutting things back.
Do you have an MOU with the property owners?
We do not. That is one thing we don't, and it gets into weird liability. So right now, it's a interesting code issue is if it's in the right of way, technically it is the responsibility, even though they don't own it and they're not really supposed to do anything with it, people still do. The maintenance of those spaces of the right of way is on the adjacent property owner. So this is one thing we're like, no, we don't want you to do this. And sometimes it's like we want to say you can't alter the system. But if people want to weed or cut flowers back, we're not gonna, cite them for that. But that is one of the things that we're doing. But I think because we are right now kind of shifting to some of these larger scale projects a little bit more, we may be shifting a little away from the right of way, except for more conveyance through our streets. It might not be as intensive. Just every neighborhood varies as far as how built out it is and how much right of way is available. So it'll vary.
Okay, thank you. Are you working with the local transit authority to design bus stops that have green infrastructure and are also accessible and, meeting normal ADA guidelines, things like that?
Yes. One of our projects we are working with the Port Authority. We had to relocate a bus stop. So we are checking in with them. We're making sure that there's, turning radiuses and proper things like that. We are putting things, identifiers, so they can actually see the bump outs, because that was one of the things we heard from a lot of other city bollards, the little bollards as well. Anytime that we're doing projects, we are kind of bringing them up to ADA compliance. If there's any ramps or anything like that, any sidewalk improvements, those are incorporated as part of the right-of-way manual that we have with the city. So it's required that you do that at the time.
Okay. Are you finding that green infrastructure increases maintenance costs, particularly over tunnels? And if so, how is the city accounting for those expenses?
So that is one of the hardest things, I think, right now, where it's very clear as to how much maintenance is needed on the tunnels. They've been doing that for a really long time. So I know there's new data kind of coming out as far as the construction of tunnels and the ongoing maintenance. But that is one thing that we kind of really are advocating for, is because then it does actually create more year-round workforce development opportunities. But the data is a little light, and we know that, and we're trying to extrapolate from any project that we're doing as far as when they're under construction. We document like how many employees were on site that day, what were they doing, so you can actually even go back where, like, okay, well, if they were bringing in this many tons of gravel, where is that coming from? All right, how many jobs does that facility employ, and things like that, so you can actually start to kind of create those numbers.
Okay, thank you. Kind of Well, has there been any pushback from community activists and or elected officials who take the perspective that using public resources should be more focused on poverty reduction, affordable housing, some perhaps bigger issues that some might think these are bigger issues rather than infrastructure improvements? Um, have you had a lot of pushback on that, you know, these dollars, our time, our resources should be going to, you know, bigger fish?
Yeah, I don't think so. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't think we've seen that. There are different pots of money and they're, I mean, we don't have a choice. It's not because we're doing this because it's goodwill. This is meeting the letter of the law, and either we pay for it with underground infrastructure or we pay for it with a combination of underground and above ground infrastructure. So I think the community's generally been very supportive of this.
And the one thing I would also say is that, you know, if we were just to build pipes, we would leave it and there would be no benefit. And by doing green infrastructure, you are getting more sidewalks, you are getting more trees, you are getting kind of betterments on a neighborhood scale level that are going to have more of an impact on the day-to-day lives versus just building tunnels underground.
I think for Pittsburgh and for every city, there's a question of at what scale is the most effective. And is it that every property owner is doing something? Is it that there's aggregated but distributed systems that are at the small to medium scale? Or are you going with a full-on regional scale, which is what we have right now, which is not meeting its needs right now? So, you know, I think every city will have a different calculation that they're running, but once you fall under consent order, consent decree, there really isn't a choice as to doing nothing or doing something else with that money.
Okay, way back in the beginning of your presentation, you described the different facets of the green infrastructure system. Is the restoration and widening of streams intended to expand the storage capacity, or is it more of a way to improve conveyance, or both?
Both.
Okay.
Yeah, it depends on the width of that valley and the capacity to take it. So two of the projects that Megan talked about, 4 Mile Run and A42 have some capacity to do both. In A41 as well, also has capacity to do both. But the Woods Run project that she showed the image from is actually pretty heavily occupied in the valley. And there's houses and libraries and firehouses and things like that. So there's just not that same capacity.
Okay. And how does permitting look when you're doing these, when the restoration and the widening? What is the process at both the state and if there are any federal implications?
Yes. So on the smaller projects, usually it's just coordinating with city agencies. As we are getting into these larger projects, there's going to be significant permitting. So we do have the Conservation District of Allegheny County. They have to do kind of like a stormwater review if it's over 2 acres of disturbance, or 1 acre of disturbance, sorry, as well as your ENS permit. Anytime we've already met with the DEP and the Army Corps of Engineers. So if you are reestablishing a connection to a U.S. body of water, then that does trigger a higher permitting issue. So Army Corps does wetland permits, dam permits, and on the rivers as well. So for the stream restorations, we are not sure if it will trigger a dam permit yet. It depends on how much we are restricting and the flow at given points. Panther Hollow Lake, I know they consider it's not an official dam. They treat that as an impoundment. And so if we can kind of keep with that, it might limit it up. But we're adding more time because of the permit. So we're assuming permitting will be 6 to 9 months, depending on the project.
Okay. I'm just going through these last couple questions here to see if there's anything that we haven't answered. Is new development required to limit stormwater runoff volume to a historic or future estimated values?
We'll talk about the RAND thing.
No, well, no, current code for stormwater reviews, you do have to manage up to like the 95 percentile storm on site. Unless you're in some of the overlay districts, because those have a higher threshold. We want to maybe take that as the baseline across the city. And then other areas have even maybe more stringent restrictions for the developers, just because there's just capacity issues, especially on the riverfronts, because you're at the bottom of the shed. They need to manage a little bit more effectively and manage a little more, so they can actually, in certain situations, they can't get their sanitary flows. They need to take stormwater out so that they can actually get their sanitary tap in.
I think maybe in that question too is a question about some of the climate change issues that we've seen and the unpredictability, or what are we forecasting towards. And Megan spoke a little bit that, we're not sure that we're throwing the ball out as far as we need to be. But the Rain Corp here in Pittsburgh did a study that looked at, like, out of the last 10 years, if our average design year is taken from 1993, out of the last 10 years, 7 of the 10 years are above that design year. So, like, what do we make of that? And how do we know where we should be? And, I give the anecdote that, my house is 100 years old and my gutters have worked really well for 100 years. But these storms that we're seeing now don't work. The gutters don't have the capacity for the storm intensities that we see. So it's a question not only at the building scale, but at the conveyance scale, the public infrastructure scale, the green infrastructure scale, and these larger capacities as well, and these larger infrastructure below grade systems as well. So I don't know that we have an answer, but we're watching it very closely to see what the trajectory is.
Thank you. Real quick, is the 5 to 10% of capital costs for maintenance an annual cost figure?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I think this will be our last question. Man, we've been ringing through this for like over half an hour. You guys have been really good sticking with me, so thank you.
We're having a beer after this.
And I'm not leaving a big bomb for last. This is an easy one. Do you have any insights on how to improve the flooding situation in the historic Ellicott City that has been inundated twice in 2 years?
Yeah, this is a tough one.
And you said,
sorry.
I thought you were going to give us an easy one. I think that in some cases there have been properties and residents that have been moved out of their buildings because of historic inconsistent flooding, in a strategic decision that the cost to maintain that infrastructure and those houses was going to surpass the ability of the homeowners and public agencies, et cetera. That's not something that people take lightly. We're a community of hilltops and valleys, and so we're not, looking at that as a widespread means of solving it, but where we have choices and can try to work with our natural systems and understand that those natural systems provided a service for us, I think we'll have some more resiliency built into the system. Otherwise, we could rebuild the sewer system and have all new equipment and still be undersized and not have access to that infrastructure to make it as resilient as we need it to be as we move forward. The flooding issue is tied so much to that, and green infrastructure is just a part of it. It's a much bigger conversation about resiliency in natural systems.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add, and I mentioned it a little bit earlier, is, I think urban renewal was real, and it wrecked a lot of cities. And so I think practices on land acquisition and things like that. Kind of people are, I know here locally that is not a term or a process that the city has wanted to do. And I think because of our decline, you know, we weren't in a position to take appropriate properties, or we had so many properties. So for a while we're like, yes, yes, build, this is great. Where I think now it is kind of that pause to kind of be like, what do we really need the city to look like, and how does it need to function to kind of be safe and be a place where people would want to come. And I think just that resiliency and that some of those issues are just really going to have to be what drives development a little bit more. That landscape urbanism component of putting that system first and kind of building out from there is important.
Okay, so Megan and Christine, thank you for joining us today, and to the Pennsylvania chapter for hosting this session. Everyone, remember, you will be able to get a PDF copy of this on our webcast webpage, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. And shortly we'll have a recording of this session available on our YouTube channel. Just search Planning Webcast on YouTube. So thanks again, and everyone have a great weekend and a great Friday the 13th.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.